Excellent. Thank you for joining Literally Alive. My name is Robert Diamante, and I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's guests, Cara Douglas and Erin O'Mara, co-editors of Alive to This, essays on living fully by 20 Maine writers. Also with us are four of the writers, Ben Jacks, Katie Coppens, and Michael Burke, and me. Erin, I'm going to read your bio. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Erin O'Mara lives in Harpswell, Maine with her partner, kayak, and gardens. Her mission is to create sustainable local news in Maine and New England, and her monthly column, Never Not Amazed, in the Harpswell Anchor keeps her busy. On summer days, you can find her marveling at the world and sipping a margarita.
It's my signature drink.
That's wonderful. How long have you been writing for the paper?
Since it relaunched in 2021.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
I might have the dates wrong, but for a while.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Cara Douglas is also in Harpswell as a writer and a yoga and meditation teacher in Harpswell. Through engagement with nature, she finds experiences that reflect human complexity and intimacy with our deeper abilities to feel, observe, and act. Her work is published in Wait, Poems from the Pandemic, A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, both by Littoral Books, Rivers of Ink, Writing the Land, and Wanderings 2. Welcome, Cara.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So Erin and Cara, welcome to Literally Alive, and congratulations to both of you. Cara, you wanted to mention something about the literary community in Maine.
Yeah, this part feels really important to me, that books like this don't just happen, even though people have good ideas and great intentions. If there was not a community of readers who read both broadly and deeply in Maine, teachers who brought along both readers and writers, communities of writers that workshop with each other and help each other through great work and difficult work, if there were not small publishing houses, local independent booksellers, we have such a great community of both in Maine, and I think that's outstanding and unique. And also a really deeply interconnected grouping of libraries that have a wonderful interlibrary loan system. And without all of these components, books like this wouldn't even be possible. Erin and I can do what we did because all of that existed before we even stepped into that ecosystem. So I really, really appreciate that being present and all of the contributions that people make to keep that alive and thriving.
Beautifully put. So the book has been a huge success within this community. What do you attribute that to? I mean, obviously the community, as you say, but what do you think it is? Is it the content? Is it the right time, the timing?
I think it's partly timing, but I also think that as a species, we question aliveness. We are aware that our lives are temporary. We are aware that we're not going to be here forever, and we have this ability to be self-reflective. And so I think it's kind of an innately human trait that we kind of grapple with. What is it to be fully alive, whether that happens at certain stages of our lives or whether it happens throughout? You know, I remember being very, very little and walking down the road, holding my aunt's hand and looking at the full moon and just being completely mesmerized and asking her hundreds of questions about the moon and why can't we go there and what does it mean and how come it has light? And, you know, these are just inherent human questions. And I think we are deeply interested in what is it? How do we live our full purpose? How do we be here in a really fully engaged, alive way?
Erin, I want you to chime in too. I think I have a question for you. Like, what are some of the reactions that you're getting from the book? You must talk to people out there.
Yeah, you know, this book, I mean, talk about feeling alive. This book and this whole process has been an extraordinary gift. And the reactions I'm receiving, that I think Cara receiving, are of joy, interest, excitement, curiosity, support. We had our book launch party at the Grange in Harpswell, and the Grange was packed. The community came out, and they didn't just show up to be there. They showed up with so much joy, and the spirit in that room was amazing. And it was just, what a gift. And that's really, the reaction has really been universally, interested and happy, and I don't know, even one of gratitude, I think. And the thing about the book, I just to add, because timing is part of it, right? Timing's part of everything, but it's also evergreen. And when you read this book, I mean, part of the journey of reading this book is that that a sense of aliveness changes, and it's dependent upon where you are in your life and the circumstance of your life. And so what makes somebody feel alive today might be very different tomorrow, or in a week, or in a year. And so in this book, right, we have 20 writers who shared authentic parts of themselves and shared generously to say what makes them feel alive. And so it's these people in all these different phases of their life with all this different experience. There's something for everyone to connect to. And I think that that's what people are seeing too.
I have to say, I was at the opening reading, and it was amazing. It
Yeah.
was just, it was a room just brimming with people that were just absolutely delighted to be there. So I know most of the people on the Zoom tonight are probably aware of the genesis of the book, or have either read the introduction, but why don't you go ahead and talk about, just very briefly, how the book started, and then we can launch into the reading, because I'm sure everybody wants to hear some reading tonight. But,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, so the brief genesis of the book is that I have had several encounters over the course of my life where I have just felt really kind of deeply connected to whatever it is that I'm doing. It's almost like time stops, and there's just a feeling of not being separate from anything. And I had an experience of that while kayaking it must have been about a year and a half ago, in bigger, more challenging conditions than I had anticipated. And really the only way to navigate it was just to put everything else aside and just be right there. And it produces for me this feeling of being completely focused and present, but also interconnected in a way that I just don't feel at all separate from the environment that I'm in. And when that happens, it's rare, but when it happens, and it did happen that day, I got off the water and I started writing about it. And some weeks later, had a conversation with Agnes at an event that Agnes of Littoral Books, at an event that we were both attending. And she said, "Do you have any ideas for a new project?" And I said, "Well, how about an anthology?" I hadn't even put forethought into it. I just said, "How about an anthology of essays about what it means to be fully alive?" And she
That's
said,
great.
"Oh, that's a great idea. Let's have tea and talk more." So
Yeah.
we did. And then she said, "Okay, we're going to do this. Littoral Books has wanted to do an essay anthology for a while, and this sounds like it's moving in the right direction. So you will be the editor." And I said, "I think that might be a mistake because I have no credentials to be the editor." And she said, "But you'll learn." And which was a huge risk. That was like, what a compliment and what a huge risk that Littoral Books took. And I then immediately turned to Erin, who is just a writer that I love, not to mention a human being that I love. And I said, "Will you do this with me?" And she said, yes. And then we had a lot to learn. And Agnes and Jim Bushell really kind of helped and coached us along and shined a light on the path. And we had all of these wonderful writers who sent us their work and trusted us to read it.
That must have been so difficult to edit down. Do you
So
want to, yeah. Erin,
yes.
do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so, well, one of the practices that Kara and I adopted, we took walking meetings. So we would go for a walk and we would talk through the essays we just read, or, even that's actually, we settled on the title during a walk. But one of the extraordinary things about collaboration and is that you both bring your best to the moment. And we really got to talk through these essays and compare how we felt about them and mull things over. And Kara has said this many times, because we were able to do that, because we were able to take that time, it's a better book. You know, if I had done it on my own, it would be a different book than it is. You know, if Kara had done it on her own, it would be a different book. So being able to do this together and in community, it was a gift. You know, Kara inviting me along on this journey is a gift, and I'm grateful. And then being able to do it together and really bring the best out of each other was amazing.
So you had like this pool of applicants, so to speak, of these wonderful essays all over the place, and you talked about them one-on-one, back and forth, and batted them back and forth, and then edit it down. I guess I'm asking a question about like process, like how, like it
Yeah.
really must have been an intense process to get to the final
Yeah.
yeah.
So we each read through all of them. We made notes. We sat together with our absolutely, we think so maybe, or no piles. And things moved around from pile to pile as we spoke to each other. And then, and Agnes was an extraordinary guide through all of this. And we sent her our choices and she came back with her comments and we sat down again with our piles. And Agnes also put a call out for, to expand the diversity of writers' perspectives, which was really helpful. You know, and in the end, through that teamwork, it's a pretty great book.
It's a pretty great book, and the art, like on the cover, and I mean, no one can say enough about Lori Harley's design. I mean, Lori's book designs are always really beautiful. The photography in this book is like so, I mean, it's illustrative to a large degree, but it's really evocative. Kara, you're friends with the photographer?
Yeah, I've known Kate for our kids went to nursery school together. And so I've known her for as long as I've known her, she's just been an avid photographer, sometimes working professionally as a photographer and sometimes pulling back from that to do other things, but continuing to keep her photography alive. Those are her kids in the photographs. And I have seen photographs of them from the time they were crawling all the way up through one of them. Her oldest son and my oldest daughter just left for college this fall. And so, I mean, she's just there. She has millions of pictures. And these were some that really stood out that she thought would mesh well with what we were doing.
Well, I have to say, coming from the photography background, I really wanted to call out the photographer because oftentimes the design and the beauty of the book gets overlooked. And of course, the beauty that's in the book and the essays is really what we're focusing on tonight. So I think we should dive into some reading. And I'm going to let one of the editors, I'm going to ask you to read from one of your essays. Erin, do you want to read from one of your essays?
Oh, sure.
And you have two essays in the book. Do you want
I
to introduce those? And
sure. So, so I wrote two essays. One is called Broken Bootstraps. And oh my goodness, because I'm on the spot, I just forgot what the second one was called. I know, right? The Power of Age.
I know it happens.
Oh my goodness.
Time too. We're amongst friends, so we all forget.
Thank you.
The other one is The Power of Age.
Power of Age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had a senior moment, I guess. Tonight I'm going to read from Broken Bootstraps, and I'm just going to read a page and a half. And so the setup is that this was at a turning point in my life, and this opens. I am sitting in the jungles of Ecuador, tripping on ayahuasca. The fire presses against my face. Flames surge and die. The temperature change strums my temples. Fire flares light the canvas of my closed eyes. Branches full of leaves dance against shoulders. Scents surf the air. Earthy, sweet musk ebbs and flows in rhythm with the shaman's prayer. I feel light and solid, rooted, peaceful, and safe. I open my eyes. A tiger nestles in the coals, staring at me. I blink and blink again. It's still there. I seal my lids, scrunching my cheeks so they push into my eyeballs, a reset to clear the confusion. The tiger stays and waits. yawning, yowling, and watching. Its jawbone is a charred branch. Its eyes flicker and gleam with the life of the fire, and it knows me. The tiger's pointy ears flick. Its body stills as it welcomes two slithering snakes between the flames. Their diamond heads and eyes shine as they bask in the fire's heat next to a resting lizard. We breathe together, breathe in sympathy with the embers, and we wait. Me, Erin O'Mara, who has a desk job and a family rooted in their desk jobs, who doesn't like unrelated food to touch on a plate and never gained the dexterity to eat even the biggest chunk of food with chopsticks, was now sitting in community with shamans. I was surrounded by people who spoke the native language of their village and couldn't talk to me. When they tried to explain the ceremony, the mom spoke to her son in her native language, and he translated it into Spanish for me. The adulting handbook lays out clear expectations. Get a job, find a ladder and climb. Keep climbing, and when it's hard, climb faster. Get coupled, get pregnant. Is 3 the magic number? Get a sensible car. Get comfortable with Cheetos crushed into the sensible car's floor and ground into the seats. Realize your family plan, your health plan, your budget plan, your retirement plan. There's no escape clause. The manual doesn't have an opt-out. What happens when you feel aimless or lost? What happens when the weight of expectations is heavy on your shoulders, driving your feet deeper? What happens when you're stuck in a space that doesn't fit you? I landed here in this moment by planned accident. I had been stuck in ennui, working, banging my head on the ceiling, elbows on the walls, and sinking into a listlessness and an overwhelming sense of meh about everything. I didn't belong, and I didn't know how to, and maybe I didn't want to. The Adulting Handbook suggests that when you're feeling stuck, you should enroll in a gym, pay the monthly membership, be dedicated for a month or so, and then keep paying and never go. I followed those instructions to the letter and didn't feel better. The handbook suggests buying a house and worrying about the mortgage. I wasn't ready for that. I did have a glass of wine and then another. I had to pull myself up and out, and with every tug, I felt my bootstraps wearing and tearing. The handbook is silent on what to do when you don't want to follow the handbook anymore. So before my bootstraps were torn through, I needed a plan. I had to use some of those handbook skills I'd learned and followed for so long to figure out how to write a new chapter. And if you want to know how it ends, you have to buy the book.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you. I have lots of questions for you, but I want to go on to read some more, and then we'll get to some questions.
Absolutely.
If anybody has comments or questions from the reader side, please chime in now. Otherwise, we'll move on to Cara. Cara, would you like to read?
Alrighty.
And you also have 2. Would you like to introduce both of yours?
I do. I have my shorter essay is called On Falling, which is about the second time I watched a big section of my very, very, very old apple tree fall apart. And which doesn't sound like aliveness, but actually there's just some real connection there. And my other essay, a little bit longer, is called Belligerent, Ornery, and Too Smart for His Own Good. And that's the one that I will read from tonight. I have a Harley I can't ride. If there was one thing in the world that terrified me most when I was little, it was fast, loud motorcycles. They looked like enormous hornets. I remember being 5, riding in a 4th of July parade hay wagon in the tiny rural town where I grew up. We had gorged on watermelon and parade candy, gotten drenched by water balloons, and were on our way to the local swimming hole when a speeding fleet of motorcycles roared up the road behind the very slow tractor pulling the wagon. I dove into my dad's lap, hands over my ears, sobbing, certain that death would follow. Sometime in my late 30s, when I could no longer bike to work because the timetable was too tight with getting kids off to school, I reconsidered my motorcycle stance. The excuse to make noise now oddly appealed to me. With a motorcycle, I could keep a lower carbon footprint than I could with my car, all with the added bonus of freedom and speed and wind and agility. We traveled to Cambodia for a friend's wedding, and I practiced riding behind Steve and Seda on their mopeds through traffic lightless intersections where buses and farm trucks, tractor trailers, and tuk-tuks converged with horns blaring, snarling through the chaos. We leaned into tight turns and maneuvered around flatbeds, carrying loads of wood. I was convinced that I was ready. Sometimes love doesn't lead us down the path we imagine. We have a dream that becomes malleable in the face of reality. Despite my obvious newfound passion and imagined skill, I never bought the motorcycle. I think of this now as I gaze at the Harley in my backyard, also noisy and unpredictable, an unanticipated addition to my family when I least expected it. The Harley in my backyard is a mule, technically a mini mule, a cross between a donkey and a miniature horse. Like a donkey, he can be belligerent, ornery, and too smart for his own good. One day, when he was up to being all three, my husband referred to him as an ass, to which our friend Erin retorted, "He's only half donkey, which makes him a half-ass." The term stuck. A half-ass named for my dream car and my childhood fear. We don't know who gave our half-ass his name. Harley arrived as a sidekick to Willow, the horse we offered to care for when our friends who own her moved. My daughter needed a horse more than I needed a motorcycle. Willow was anxious without a companion, and Harley had been rescued from a kill truck a few years earlier. They came as a pair, together scheming to escape the paddock, fighting over grain rations, and every now and then curling up in the warm sun, their heads leaning into one another. Harley has a special stance, a particular stare down that he deploys anytime someone, be it friend or stranger, walks into our yard. Most are charmed into thinking he's the friendliest little half-ass they've ever met. Truly, he is the only half-ass most of them have met, and under his charm, he's scheming for a handout. Too small to be ridden, Harley's primary form of exercise and intellectual development happens when my daughter Ellie, his primary caregiver, coaches him over jumps she builds in the paddock. When she's at school, he's left to his own devices. The problem, it seems, is that Harley is both food obsessed and bored. And I will stop there because Harley gets himself and Willow into some trouble that we then have to figure out both how to be alive and how to keep them alive.
I'm going to give something away. I really enjoyed it when they make a little break, and that's all I'm going to say. I thought that was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for that. All right, I think we should move on to some readers, but maybe before we do, Erin, Cara, do you have anything else you'd like to say about the how the book formed or anything? Yeah.
I think that the book is really the merits of this book really rest in the quality of what all of the writers brought to it. They really brought elements of their own lives and opened up parts of their experience to share in some vulnerable ways with people who will read it, who they will never know. And I really appreciate that about all of the writers who contributed to this book. And I think we can turn it over to them because I want to hear their stories.
100%. So Ben, we're going to start with you since you are the opening of the book. You'll have to unmute yourself. And while you're figuring out how to unmute yourself, I'll read your bio. So Ben Jacks is architect and recovering academic, author of A House and Its Atmosphere, a shelter memoir, is planting trees, establishing a pollinator meadows, and restoring wetlands at Two Scholars Farm in Unity, Maine. Welcome, Ben.
Well, thank you for having me. I was very sorry to miss the opening party. It sounds like it was an awful lot of fun.
It was a heap of fun.
So I'm glad to be here. A couple of things. Yes, we're working on this project up in Unity at Two Scholars Farm. You can check us out on Instagram and see our progress. This essay was written at a time when I was very uncertain as to how things were going to go. If you check us out on Instagram, you'll see that they've actually gone pretty well, which is a good thing. I was really excited to learn that, first of all, that my particular essay opened the book. It was a secret kept from me by my wife and Agnes, who know each other. And I was absolutely thrilled to be presented with a copy of the book and see it was right there up front. But then there was another thing. I've got a great deal of appreciation for Michael Burke's essay, which is about how those of us who transplanted to Maine, I transplanted to Maine first in 1986, we're always reminded that we're not true Mainers. I was thrilled to be considered among the 20 Maine writers in this book. It just felt like such an enormous affirmation. So I'm going to read from my essay, which is about the process of trying to rescue this farm and barn. I'm going to read right from the beginning, and then in the interest of time, skip ahead a little bit and read a little more. Most of the time the essay is called Rotted Teeth, Rotting Timbers. Most of the time I lead a neurotic and worried existence, or I am dead asleep. Both states of being are arguably not maximally alive. But recently, after months of work with my psychoanalyst, Laura, I had the experience of breaking through, recognizing how some deep and troubling themes have ruled my life. Seeing these patterns in perspective for the first time felt exhilarating. Leaving Laura's office, I felt exceedingly alive. I was reminded of other times I have felt especially alive, immersed in a beloved activity, in a state of flow, like a skier, skydiver, or race car driver, Mahali Csikszentmihalyi style. Not being one for speed or danger, I might feel that way while hiking, writing, drawing, cooking, planting trees, or fixing things. I have learned these truths about feeling alive only recently, after the beginning of my 6th decade, which is already a third over. How I feel may depend on which phase I am in this emerging 4-part state of existence rubric: alive, in the flow, anxious, asleep. Sometimes I am thinking about death, which maybe makes it a 5-part rubric, from most alive to least alive to dead. I am a vacillator who cycles through the first 4 stages and sometimes knows the 5th phase is lurking around the corner, and it is final. Recently, I have found myself contemplating life in an antique barn. Peggy and I bought a farm in Unity, and it's a project, an opportunity, or rather a series of projects and opportunities to bring the place back to its inherent beauty and better ecological function. It's a conservation project, a conscious attempt to fly in the face of climate catastrophe. We're taking care, growing trees and pollinator plants, guarding and building wetlands and other habitats, and, as naive and hubristic as it sounds, trying to help our planetary home. We began our cleanup last fall and progressed to demolishing the trailer and its wood-framed additions, and we were nearly done when the first hard cold and snow rolled in. We've had punishing storms and freezing temperatures ever since, so where the trailer stood is a debris field. I'm looking at the weather forecast all the time, wondering if I can get back to work, despite the ice and snow, or meet with those who can help with electricity, move the Quonset hut, or save the barn. Some of the conversations I have had are disturbing. The scope and cost of the work threatens me, and I fear ruin. But then I remind myself that in my anxious state, I catastrophize, this being a symptom of having suffered violence as a small child. The traumatized small child in me believes the worst will happen, The physical assault will come. The barn will fall, and I will be reduced to tears, curled in bed in a ball. I would like to get over this, grow past this, but the secret and distant feeling has persisted over decades and won't be expunged. One day in January, I'm meeting a master joiner about restoring the barn. While waiting for him to arrive, I sharpen my chainsaw and spend the time behind the barn cutting the box elder trees into 7-foot-long poles. I could try to tell you I'm in a state of flow, cutting, bending, lifting, working, making decisions, moving without thinking. I could tell you it is all chop wood, carry water. But worry creeps in. I'm working near the south side of the barn, under the wall that is collapsing. In early December, during a violent storm that caused widespread flooding and wind damage all over central Maine, a major timber fell from the south wall. After a lot of anxiety and dithering, I ordered 5 screw jacks from the Ellis Company in Oklahoma City, which ships shoring out on short notice when buildings catch fire or structures fail or mines or trenches collapse. In a couple of days, my body weight in screw jacks should arrive, strapped to a pallet, dropped in the drive. This feels like my most common psychological state of being. I'm anxiously awaiting shoring, aware of the risk of collapse. I have also learned in psychoanalysis that I am sometimes not good at asking for and securing what I need, hence the dithering over ordering the screw jacks in the first place. I sometimes don't practice being assertive or setting up boundaries properly. This is because I learned early in life that needs might not be met, and then, through the stages of growth, early and middle childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, I learned to feel at fault for nearly everything. The barn collapsing? Somehow it's my fault. In the spring of my 3rd year in high school, I was getting ready to go to a dance when a piece of tooth broke loose in my mouth. I looked in the mirror and then saw with my own eyes that I had large cavities and half-gone teeth. My parents hadn't sent me to a dentist in several years, probably because they wouldn't have been able to pay, or maybe also because they were too stressed out to think about it. Everything in our family had fallen apart when my father lost his job in the ice storm days of the early 1970s. Tears and crying, begging for help, my mother telling me she will find a dentist, me eventually calming down, resolving to pull myself together and to go to the dance anyway. That's what I remember from that terrible night of the rotted, broken teeth. Which brings me back to my meeting with the master joiner who is interested in helping me save the barn. In one of my exploratory inspections, I discovered that one of the main posts on the outside wall, closest to the silo, is almost entirely decayed. All that is left of the 10 by 12 timber is the last couple of inches on the interior, giving the appearance, but not the substance, of integrity and support. There is a leak, decades old, where the silo roof meets the main roof. The timber is wetted again and again from rain and ice above, and so it continues to rot from behind until now. Discovered, it must be addressed.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you.
Katie, you're up.
All right.
Katie Coppens is a middle school science teacher who lives in Brunswick with her husband and 2 daughters. Katie has published 8 science-themed children's books and has been a finalist 3 times for Maine Literary Award for Young People's Literature. Congratulations on that and welcome.
Thank you.
What's the title of yours? And set it up for us.
Yeah. Before I jump into it, I just wanted to also give a shout out to MWPA. How I heard about the anthology and submission was through the Brunswick Gather. So I think that's also a really key part of our writing community in Maine. And my essay is called My Personal Summit, a Mile Long and a Mile Up. And I'm actually going to read from the middle of it. So a little bit of a setup for it. This essay takes place over the pandemic. And when it began, my older daughter was 6 and my younger daughter was 4. And as a teacher, I was very much in it, trying to work from home, trying to parent my kids, and I felt very trapped. And my husband is a long distance runner, and he got to escape a lot as I didn't. And so the idea came to try to just get out and run for 1 mile. And that's how the story setup is. One day of running became 2. Then a week became a month, and it kept continuing. It didn't matter how fast I ran, just that I completed a mile. Each day that I ran 1 mile, the streak extended, and so did my own personal record. I was accomplishing something at a time in life that I didn't have many positives. The streak forced me to set boundaries because there were no negotiations or exceptions. I had to run at some point that day. I ran with a headlamp after putting my kids to bed. I ran in a 45-mile-an-hour windstorm. Then I ran the next day when we had no power. I ran in a blizzard where I chanted to myself, "Run like a penguin, run like a penguin." I ran through returning to in-person work, my youngest daughter's first day of kindergarten, holidays, and most importantly, I ran on the day that I quit the streak. With the return to school and work, our house was now our haven and the place where it felt like we could breathe. We wore masks in public and social distance, but home was filled with closeness, cuddles, and comfort, until it wasn't. In January of 2021, before anyone in my family was vaccinated, both of my kids were put in a 10-day quarantine after an exposure to COVID-19 at before-school care. None of us had taken a COVID test, which at that time involved a drive-through experience where the test was administered by someone with a full face shield and a disposable plastic coat. Mid-quarantine, we decided to all get tested, just to be sure. We thought it would be good practice for our kids to experience what it's like to get tested and to reaffirm for them that they were safe. 2 days later, the phone rang, telling us that our youngest daughter tested positive. The facade I had created vanished. We needed to protect others from us, and we needed to protect ourselves from our normally joyful 5-year-old who is now in isolation. Best case scenario, we'd be housebound for 20 days, 10 for her isolation from the date of the positive, and 10 for the rest of our quarantine beyond that. The news was filled with stories of worst case scenarios, and my mind was in an endless spiral of what could go wrong. My youngest daughter developed a fever, and as her temperature rose, so did our stress. With so little in my control, I decided that what I could control was my choice to stop running. My normal, happy facade for my children was replaced by an N95 mask that I wore as I tucked my older daughter in. I sat distanced on the end of her bed and asked how she was feeling. She said she felt fine, and asked if I'd start the streak again one day. She was 7 years old, scared for her little sister and the rest of us, sad to be out of school, and I couldn't answer her with the truth. No, I was done running. She looked at me with so much hope, but I knew I couldn't start it all again. I was never honest about why I had started running, and I couldn't be honest now about why I was stopping. As I closed her door, I kept picturing the disappointment in her eyes. I may have started running to get some space, but that's not why I kept running. There wasn't the same need for escape. Months before I had returned to work, yet I still ran. We saw friends and were being cautious but social, yet I still ran. The streak's purpose shifted in me from escapism to doing something I never thought I could do. In my early 40s, I was choosing to run in the rain and snow. I liked how it felt to push myself in a whole new way and the pride I saw when my girls talked about my running. I walked downstairs and realized I still had a choice. At this time of the pandemic, people in quarantine weren't supposed to leave their house. Looking around, I came up with a plan. The bottoms of my sneakers were dirty, so I wiped them off, then moved toys and furniture and made myself a running route inside the house. I set the oven timer for 12 minutes and asked Alexa to play Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. With my mask on, I ran. That's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much. I loved that picture when I read your essay of you running around the house to the boss. Right on. Thank you. Michael, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for being for letting
I
me.
have to read your intro first, Michael.
Oh, sorry. Well,
That's okay.
I won't know
Glad
who I
that you're
am.
raring to go. Michael
should-
Burke is the author and of the memoir and adventure The Same River Twice, and of features and essays in Down East, Yankee, Islands, Outside, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and Maine Decor. He won the 2018 Maine Literary Award for Drama. He is the Professor Emeritus of Creative Writing at Colby College. Now you're on, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry to interrupt you, Robert.
Oh, no, not at all. Tell us what else you've got cooking. I know that you have another publication.
Yeah, I hate to be self-promoting on this occasion, but I do have a brand new book, The Art of the Myth, which should be in bookstores and in Amazon right now, a collection of Maine-based nonfiction. So I'm going to read You Moved to Maine, and the backstory on this, which I won't be able to read a part of, is a visit that I made to Gettysburg with some students years ago. And I always thought I would do something with it, but I never could figure out what. And then fairly recently, I learned that one of the, I think the last surviving members of the 20th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment, the famous regiment at Little Round Trop in Gettysburg on July 3rd, I think it was. One of the last ones is buried in a cemetery just a couple miles from my house here. So that kind of inspired me to put this together. So I think I'll just read the opening section, and all of that about the Maine regiment is gone, but that's okay. You can find it in the book. You moved to Maine. You moved to Maine in 1987 for complicated reasons. Maybe not so complicated. The woman who will become your wife is from Iowa. You're from California. She doesn't want to move to California. You don't want to move to Iowa. Somehow Maine is a reasonable compromise when the two of you are sitting in Western Massachusetts. It makes sense to you, though, because Maine is the closest thing to a wilderness in the East, and you like wildernesses and rural towns and thinly populated areas, and Maine fits. And you move to a village that feels close to the first and definitely participates in the second and third. Your neighbors on either side, whose houses you can see, but mostly not, are both mill workers in the nearby paper mill, and their wives work from home. You and your wife work at colleges, and you, at least you, enjoy being among Mainers, people who were born and raised on the road on which you now live, and in fact are several generations deep into having lived on the road. You appreciate that kind of commitment to a place, though you don't imagine you will make that same commitment. You are from away, you will never be a Mainer, and your instincts are that your life here is temporary, lasting only as long as the jobs do, and maybe not even that long. But you have kids when you arrive, and then another one after you settle. The new one is a Mainer, a Maine native, but not. Being born in Maine doesn't make you a Mainer, apparently. Those are the rules. You learn. It's not that easy. Maybe if she has a baby in Maine, maybe that baby will be a Mainer, but that's the closest you can come. You don't really care. You're a Californian and always will be in the eyes of your neighbors and others, no matter how long you live here. You decide you like Maine, although it can be a struggle. You live far from the coast and close to where the open spaces are, including areas of the state called unorganized territories or plantations. You are charmed by the term unorganized, which suggests a place that is both disorganized and won't submit to being organized. Plantation sounds genteel until you think of the Southern associations, and you don't think of it as genteel anymore, but still unusual, a bit of character that California doesn't have. You think you will wait until your first book is published, then get another gig somewhere else. But the years pass and the book doesn't come, and then the book comes, but you don't leave. You are settled, still an outsider, still trying to figure out how you feel about Maine. Then one day you're in the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You're there for a conference with students. Years later, you have forgotten what the conference was about. Since you're in Gettysburg, you must tour the battlefield, about which you know less than nothing, except that Lincoln gave a speech named after the town, which, when you return to the speech, you see used the word here 7 times among the 153 words in the middle of the speech, because the here is crucial to the speech, to history. I'll stop there.
All right, we come to the question and answer portion. I do have a question that's in the chat. I'm just going to make an observation really quick. When I read your essay, Michael, I read through it and I'm like, he's writing in the second person. He's writing you. And I read through it a couple times and I thought, why? I wondered why you didn't write it in the first person. And then I thought it was more powerful the second time reading it because of that. Can you comment on your choice of voice there?
Yeah, somewhat instinctive. I'd been playing around in my courses at Colby, and you know, one of the exercises we do would be to write in the second person, and I was always struck by how it liberated some students. Like they would just suddenly flourish by using the second person. And then there's a writer at Emerson, Gerald Walker, whose work I really like, and he uses the second person a lot. And I actually had him to come to Colby in my last year there for a reading. So I wasn't trying to mimic him, but it just felt completely organic to do it that way. And once I got launched in it, the whole thing just, you know, I like everybody, I labor over drafts, but this, I don't know, I did 3 drafts maybe. I mean, it just came right out.
Thank you so much for that. In the interest of time, I'm going to go on to Jillian Burns has a question for the editors, and then I'm going to give it to Kara and Erin to lead some questions for the writers. So Jillian Burns wrote Soft Features, also published by Littoral Books, and is with us tonight. Were there any themes that came up so much in the submissions that you had to give them their own stack and choose among them? That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. Well, at one point we were trying to figure out if we were going to organize the book along themes. And the theme that came up the most was the connection of death to aliveness. And that surprised me because that's not where my mind went, and it was part of my learning experience in this book. And I'm trying to remember, Kara, did it get its own stack? I can't remember. Actually, I think it did.
Yeah, it did, because we decided we wanted to be careful about how many essays we included in the book where death was central, because it would take on the quality of the whole book would take on a different tone.
Yep.
And so we did, in that category in particular, we had to be specific in our choices about how to incorporate that.
Interesting insights. Thank you so much. And thank you for that question, Jillian. Patricia O'Donnell just has a comment. Great readings, all of you. And of course, Carl Little, who's also in the book, wanted to remind us about the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance and that network. And I think that was mentioned already. So I'm going to let you two take it. I'm sure you have questions for the writers. Erin or Cara, would you like to start?
I would love to, if that's okay. I want to go to Katie's essay, because one of the things I love the most about what she writes is, and she just really beautifully illustrates the ripple effect that one small choice can have on the people around us. And in this particular instance, it's her family. And I don't want to give away the whole essay, but there is a moment that really stands out for me in her writing where, you know, she's running in the house and she captures her family's reaction. And in it, she says, I grabbed my phone and took photos as I ran because I wanted to remember who our family became at that moment. And every time I read that in her essay, I just burst into tears. It's so well written and so well included. And it's just a moment that I feel like every family needs. And there's this sense that when we really dig deep, like, you know, my sense from Katie's work is that she was all in on quitting this streak. She was done. And something about the look in her daughter's eyes and something about how she had come this far really changed her mind. And when we dig deep into our own resistance, sometimes I think that's when we really connect. That's when the aliveness really changes us, and we're not the same on the other side of that. And I'm wondering if the way that I'm reading it is how you experienced it, Katie, and if is there anything that you can say about that? Like in the moment of that decision, did something really shift inside of you?
Yeah, it was significant. So it's hard to like bring our minds back to that time period of how scary that was before any of us were vaccinated and the unknown. Later on, you'll see the night before my daughter tested positive, we actually had a sleepover where she slept on my chest, and I was in my I truly thought I was getting COVID. Like, and I was just like, nothing matters. What matters is my family and us being okay. And I actually moved the sneakers away from the front door and I put them into the closet. I was done. It didn't matter. And the timestamp of those photos is actually around 8 p.m. at night. So like that whole day had passed, and it didn't matter. The running didn't matter. What mattered was the safety of our family. And then when I had that moment with my older daughter, it was like, what does matter? What matters is what I am showing my kids in this moment where we don't feel like we have any control. And it was huge. And the series of events that happened of my youngest, who was sick, coming onto the steps and going one step down as I was doing those silly laps around my house, and then my older daughter emerging downstairs, it was just everything we needed. And afterward, I went and took a shower, and for the first time, I took off my mask that day and I started crying because it was such a time of fear and holding on to what I couldn't at that moment. It was like, you know what, today I can run. And it was, I think, a big part of this essay and the work of writing it was digging deep into myself of not only who am I as a person, but who am I as a mom? And I hope that comes throughout it.
Yeah, and I think there's just the transformative power of when we really connect with who we are and what we do or don't have control over, and how we show up for the people we care about. I think that there's some really amazing transformation that can happen in that. And you shared that really well. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of this book.
Thank you. Erin, do you have questions or comments for anyone?
Oh, I do. Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. I think we've mentioned that, the book is what it is because of all of the writers who showed up and really shared so authentically. I have questions about process, or really the effect that writing has on you. And we have Michael, who writes about moving and assimilating and finding threads of connection. Katie, fear and triumph, really. Ben finding something bigger than himself. Kara, like of life choices and learning about what's important. And Robert, your essay is a journey, also tripping. And but in it you sort of extol yourself and us to just believe in anything, right? And so I'm just wondering that when you, in the process of writing, how does that process frame your perspective on what you're writing about? Does it change how you feel about the subject? Does it make things more clear to you? Yeah, and that's a question to anybody.
Ben, can I throw it out to you? We haven't heard from you in a half hour.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that you asked that question. One of the things I've been thinking about in reading everything in this collection is the relationship between showing and telling, as in the old saw, show, don't tell when you write. I mean, there's some marvelous passages of people reaching some, wonderful philosophical reflection, and passages that I think are quite universal, and maybe they're about psychological insight, or they're about spiritual recognition. And I would say, for me personally, in terms of process, you know, I've been on a journey for the last 2 years that has been totally unexpected in my life, and totally extraordinary, really. You know, our project is enormously collaborative in Unity, and I'm surprised all the time by people who show up who want to help and have things to contribute. And I felt inspired to write about this because of the invitation. As I said in my bio, I'm a recovering academic. I left academia in 2020. I taught architecture and interior design for 20 years, and really needed to leave the academy. It had become very unpleasant, and I hadn't done much writing, academic or otherwise, in recent years. And so being able to write about something that you're involved with that really matters to you is it allows for a real understanding, integration of all the parts of yourself as you're doing something. And for me, I simply want to keep writing about our project, through the essay form, and build another book. I've had just marvelous experiences, and the way I've conceived of this is when it becomes too cold to work outside, when it becomes too cold to work on the barn, I'm going to hole up and write essays about the experience that I'm having. Some might say that it's therapeutic, but I think it's more about constructing what you really think and feel about a particular situation and how you understand things, and using language to the fullest. I get excited when I use language and I feel like I might be able to reach somebody else who will have an aha moment about words or phrases or common ways of thinking that are maybe turned on their head for a moment. So that's how I think about it, and I will credit being able to write for this anthology for opening that up for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we're coming up on time. I feel like we could go over a little bit. This is such an interesting conversation. Erin or Kara, do you have any questions for any of the readers tonight? Any further?
I would like to kind of direct some attention toward Michael's essay. One of the things that came out of that essay for me was that sometimes deep engagement comes with contradiction. And I can see this in his essay, in the way he kind of describes he really wants to be here in Maine, but maybe not forever. And he feels like part of the community, but also maybe not quite. And there's a place where he describes walking on ice, but there's no way he's driving his car out there. And so, Michael, these contradictions contradictions like this have the potential to close us down. But in your case, you keep wrestling with them. And it feels to me in your essay like you're holding kind of this little bit of background tension, and then we're transported to Little Round Top and something shifts and something opens up. Can you say something about, what was your experience of what happened there? And I'm getting the feeling that you wrote about it years after the experience, and what happened in the interim?
Well, you're exactly right that as I said, I embrace Maine pretty well, but you're always, as a Californian, you're always an outsider. And we've had experiences where people from the next town over feel the same way as we do because they're from the next town over, even though they were born in Maine. I find that kind of charming, frankly. But and I was okay with the idea that we're not really part of it. But when I was there at a little round top, I mean, I was surprised myself how sort of proud I was that these humble, modest, volunteers had basically saved the Union. I mean, I couldn't believe it. These guys down the road from me basically saved the Union on that day, which I think is historically accurate. That's not hyperbole. And so I didn't do anything with it for a long time. And then, as I say, because of the guy being turned out to be buried close by, then I think what happened is that I wanted to write about how I felt connected at that moment, and then also what they saved us for, which when anybody gets to the end of the essay, you'll see that that's kind of complicated. All the things that were saved includes traitors, includes people who basically hate the country, who would do everything to drag the country down. So, that's a complication. They saved us for what is at the moment kind of a dismal present. So yeah, there should be a lot of tension in there. Thank you for pointing that out.
Well,
You.
we're just about at time. I feel like we could go 2 hours easily with Literally Alive tonight. But we are going to stop there because I'm sure everybody wants to get to their supper, and this sort of sets up our next Literally Alive, which will be December 11th. Emma Crochelle will be reading from Hermitage, which is also published by Littoral Books. She'll be reading some poetry. And we're also inviting a couple more readers from Alive to This, who will read from their essays on December 11th, Wednesday, December 11th. So join us then. I really want to thank Kara and Erin for agreeing to do this tonight, and the readers, Ben, Katie, Michael, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to do this, and of course everybody in the audience. Most of all, I'd like to thank Jim and Agnes Bouchel, who I know are hiding out there somewhere in a little window. So Agnes, if you'd like to say something really quick before we go. You might have to unmute yourself.
Hi,
There you go.
I'm muting. This was a wonderful show, Robert and everyone. Thank you so much. Kara, Erin, Michael, Ben, Katie, it's been wonderful. Thanks everyone for coming. If you don't have the book, buy it. It's a good book. It's a very good book. And Robert, thank you so much. Great host. Yay.
Yeah, great host and a wonderful essay in the book. So
Yes.
Well, maybe I'll read something next time
I
on
hope
December
so.
11th.
Yes, you should. That would be great.
All right, I'll plan on it.
Great.
Thank you so much, everybody, and join us.